Every good guy needs a bad guy. And the moment you opened that box and pulled out the man in black, your whole living room turned into the West. He was the one you actually reached for. Not the clean-cut hero in the white hat, but the outlaw, the one who robbed the stagecoach, ambushed the cavalry, and made every battle worth fighting. You spent more afternoons being the villain than you ever did being the sheriff, and you loved every minute of it. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. There was something about that black-clad outlaw that pulled you in completely. He came with a rifle, a pistol, a knife, a coil of rope, and a face that looked like it had seen trouble and gone looking for more. You snapped each weapon into his molded hands, and suddenly the rules of the afternoon were yours to write. He could rob the bank, he could take a hostage, he could ride off into the hills with the cavalry on his trail. He was the engine of every story, because without him there was nothing to fight, nothing to chase, nothing to win, and you understood that even at 8 years old, gun in his plastic fist, grinning to yourself on the bedroom floor, the hero was fine, sure, but the hero followed rules. The outlaw made the rules up as he went, and so did you, and that was the whole appeal of him. These figures had a heft that nothing else on the toy shelf could match. You had held the other action figures of the day, and they felt hollow, light, almost flimsy by comparison. But these were solid, dense, packed tight in your palm, with a weight that made them feel real, like they could take a beating and ride through it. Grown men who held them as boys still talk about that exact feeling, the surprising heaviness, the quality, the sense that you were holding something built to outlast you. One of them put it simply, he'd give a lot of money just to hold his again. That's not how anyone talks about a piece of plastic. That's how a man talks about a piece of his childhood. Their bodies moved in a way that made the whole game come alive. The arms bent at the shoulder and the elbow, the legs swung at the hip and the knee, and you could pose them into 100 positions that each told a different piece of the story. You could sit one deep in a saddle, you could lay one flat behind a rock to take aim, you could stand one tall with his arm cocked back, frozen in the half second before everything went wrong. Some of them even hit a lever in the back that snapped an arm up fast, so the outlaw could draw before the other man cleared leather, and you played that single duel over and over, thumb on the lever, deciding every time who walked away and who dropped in the dust. The way they moved wasn't a feature to you. It was the whole difference between a stiff little doll and a living character you could put anywhere your imagination needed him. What made them yours, truly yours, was that you decided everything. You popped the head off one body and pressed it onto another and invented a brand new character on the spot. An instant mountain man, a renegade scout, somebody who never existed until you willed him into the dirt of your imaginary frontier. Nobody handed you a script. There was no right way to play. The outlaw you were supposed to root against became the hero of your story, or the villain stayed a villain and met his end at the bottom of a canyon you built out of couch cushions. You were the writer, the director, and the law of that little world, and the figures simply did what you told them to do, and they didn't stay in their own world either. That's the part only the kids who lived it really understand. The outlaw climbed out of the West and crossed into every other battle on the floor. He took on your soldiers. He squared off against your superheroes. He became a giant menacing the smaller figures, or a casualty dragged off the field, or the one bad guy big enough to threaten an entire army of someone else's toys. The frontier had no fences. Whatever else lived in your toy box got pulled into the story, and the man in black was usually right at the center of it, causing the kind of trouble that made the whole afternoon worth living. He had a whole world riding with him, and that's what turned a single figure into a saga. You knew them by touch before you ever looked. The smooth molded vest, the ridge of a holster, the little notch where the hat pressed onto the head. The tiny accessories so small you were forever losing them in the carpet and the couch and the cold space under the bed. Every boy who had them remembers the constant low-grade tragedy of the missing pieces, the rifle that vanished, the single boot, the canteen that turned up months later in a heating vent. You dumped the whole box out on the floor just to take inventory, just to make sure your outlaw still had his gun, and the sound of all that plastic spilling out is a sound you could still pick out of a crowd today. It meant the West was about to open up again. It meant the afternoon had begun. There was the proud chief and the warriors painted in fierce, who could be enemies 1 hour and allies the next. There was the cavalry officer with his saber and his orders. There were the horses, and you remember the horses the way they came with real saddles and tiny reins and bridles you could actually buckle, the way a figure could swing up into the saddle and ride. There was the covered wagon, the corral, the ranch, the whole sprawling frontier that you added to piece by piece, birthday by birthday, until your bedroom floor held an entire territory. Each new figure, each new animal, each new wagon was a door into a bigger story, and you were never finished because the West was never finished. Half of you didn't play alone, and that's a memory worth holding on to. They could take whatever you threw at them, and you threw everything. They got dropped down the stairs and buried in the sandbox and left out in the rain and run over by a bike, and they came through it. A scuff here, a chewed hat there, a little fading from a summer on the windowsill, but they survived the way the toughest toys did, and the wear only made them more yours. Every mark was a story you'd put there, and because they were so hard to break, they got passed down. A big brother handed his outlaw to a little brother. A cousin inherited the whole ranch. These weren't toys you used up and tossed. They were toys that moved from hand to hand, gathering scratches in history, until one day they finally disappeared and everyone wished they'd held on a little tighter. There was a brother across the room building his own side of the war, a friend who brought his figures over so the two armies could finally meet, a sister who begged for the cowgirl and rode her horse right into the middle of your battles whether you liked it or not. And here's the thing, you might admit now that you wouldn't then, you didn't really mind. The cowgirl gave the West a reason, somebody to protect, somebody to ride for, and the sister who insisted on playing turned out to be part of why those afternoons are the ones you still remember. The frontier was big enough for all of you. You traded figures, you borrowed a horse, you argued over who got the outlaw because everybody wanted to be the outlaw. Those afternoons weren't really about plastic at all. They were about the people on the floor beside you. And the West was just the place where you all met. They were about the people on the floor beside you, and the West was just the place where you all met. There were no batteries in any of it, and that turned out to matter more than anyone knew. Nothing lit up, nothing beeped, nothing moved on its own. The outlaw didn't talk until you gave him a voice, didn't ride until you made him ride, didn't fall until you decided his time had come. Every ounce of life in that whole frontier came out of you. Your hands, your imagination, the stories you spun out of nothing on a quiet afternoon. That's exactly why it stuck so deep. You don't remember a machine entertaining you. You remember the worlds you built, the voices you gave them, the endings you chose. The figures gave you a man in black and an open range and then got out of the way, and everything that happened next was yours alone. A child raised on screens may never know that particular kind of ownership, and the men who do know it would tell you it was one of the best things about being a boy back then. They came from a company that, for a while, ruled the whole toy world, an American giant that turned out more playthings than anyone else on Earth. When the competition lit up the market with a soldier every boy suddenly wanted, this company tried to answer with soldiers of its own, and it didn't work. The military figures sat on the shelves, so they made a daring turn away from the battlefield and rode straight into the canyons and cattle towns of the American frontier instead, and that gamble is the only reason the man in black ever ended up in your hands. They almost gave you a different cowboy entirely, one licensed from a popular television show, but the price was too steep, so they invented their own, and in doing so, they accidentally created a world bigger and freer than any licensed hero could ever have been. For a golden stretch of years, that frontier was everywhere a boy looked. There was a strange freedom in getting to be the bad guy, and only a kid really understands it. In a world full of grown-ups telling you to be good, to sit still, to follow the rules, here was a man who broke every one of them and answered to no one, and for an afternoon, you got to be him. You got to plan the robbery, spring the ambush, ride against the law, and laugh about it. It wasn't about wanting to be wicked, it was about wanting just once to be the one nobody could tell what to do. The outlaw let a small boy feel enormous and dangerous and free, and then you'd put him back in the box and go wash up for dinner, perfectly good again. He was a safe place to keep the wild part of you, and every boy needs somewhere to keep that. It was in the holiday catalog you dog-eared in November. It was under the tree on the best mornings of your life. It was the gift you tore open and the figure you didn't put down for the rest of the day. There are men today who can still show you a faded photograph of themselves on a Christmas morning 6 years old, clutching their first cowboy with a grin that hasn't faded in 60 years. That's what these were. Not a toy you played with and forgot, but a morning you never stopped reaching back toward. You wanted them long before you got them, and the wanting was almost as sweet as the having. You would stand in the toy aisle and stare at the boxes, the painted scenes of the open range, the outlaw and the lawman squared off, the chief on his horse against a desert sky, and you would read every word on the back. Study every accessory laid out in the illustration and start building the stories in your head right there on the store floor. You knew which figure you wanted next. You knew exactly. You would drop hints for weeks, circle the picture in the catalog, lie awake the night before a birthday wondering if this was the year you would finally get the one you had been dreaming of. And when you did, when the weight of that box landed in your hands and you tore it open and lifted him out, the want and the having met in a single perfect moment that a grown man can still feel an echo of all these years later. And then the way these things always seem to go, it slipped away. The company that made them was swallowed by a corporation that didn't understand what it had bought, that saw spreadsheets where you saw the West. The frontier was rebranded, then thinned out, then quietly let go. The factories that had stamped out your outlaw and your chief and your cavalry fell silent. The molds that made them were packed away and left to gather dust for the better part of 20 years. Nobody held a funeral. One Christmas, the West was simply gone from the shelves, and the boys who'd ridden it didn't even notice at first, because by then they were growing up and putting the figures in a box and the box in a closet. That's the cruel quiet of how the best things from back then left us. There was no last great battle, no send-off, no moment anyone marked. The outlaw didn't ride off into a sunset, he just stopped appearing in the catalogs. The shelves filled up with something newer and shinier, and the frontier that had felt endless to a 7-year-old turned out to have an ending after all. No one announced it. You only recognize it now when looking back and realizing there was a last afternoon you played, and you had no idea it was the last. You never got to say goodbye, because you didn't know it was leaving. Somewhere out there is the toy box that got carried to the curb, the figures a mother sold at a yard sale while you were away, the whole territory you built and rebuilt across 100 afternoons, gone in a single trip to the dump. Ask a man what he'd give to open that box one more time, and you'll watch something move across his face. He doesn't want the plastic, he wants the floor, the brother, the winter light through the window, the version of himself who believed the bad guy in black was the most exciting thing in the entire world. He wants the afternoon back. And the afternoon is the one thing no company ever sold and no collector can ever ship to your door. Some of you still have one, tucked in a drawer or standing on a shelf, scarred and faded and missing a hat, and you can't quite say why you kept him through every move and every clear out when so much else got thrown away. But you know why, really? He's not plastic to you. He's a witness. He was there for the best part, the part before everything got complicated, and as long as he's around, a little piece of that boy on the carpet is still around too. The rest of you would give almost anything to hold one again, just for a minute, just to feel that surprising weight settle into your palm and watch the years fall away. So if you were one of those boys, if you knew the weight of that outlaw in your hand, if you ever swapped ahead to make a brand new man, if you ever rode the whole West across your bedroom floor until your mother called you for supper, then you already know this was never about cowboys at all. It was about being the one who got to decide how the story ended. It was about a world you ruled completely, back when ruling a world was as simple as kneeling on the carpet and reaching into a box. That world closed. But it was yours once, fully and freely yours, and nobody can ever take the having of it away from you. Which figure rode at the center of your West? Was it the outlaw in black, the proud chief, or someone only you remember?